Yo, what is up? It's the Tominator back with another one. So in my last video I did a brief recap of the classic physique division at the 2017 Mr. Olympia, and I gotta tell you, all the artistic posing they were doing really got me thinking about the golden era and all the amazing aesthetic poses from back in the day. So for this video I compiled a list of some of the most iconic and incredible poses throughout bodybuilding history. And these are what I consider to be some of the best, but this list is by no means exhaustive, so if I missed anyone, please let me know in the comments below. Now, generally, I'm only going to show one pose per bodybuilder, but there are a couple of exceptions like Schwarzenegger here, who was famous for probably 5 or 6 different signature poses. But in my mind, one stands out above and beyond the rest for Arnold, and we'll see that a little later. Also, keep in mind that I'm not going to be featuring any mandatory poses, alright? So this list is meant to showcase more unique, non-compulsory poses, so don't expect to see any more Dorian Yates lat spreads or Kevin Levrone most musculars. We all know these guys kick ass in these shots, but what I want to do with this video is highlight some of the more artistic representations of the sport. Some of those poses you don't see every day. You know, those statuesque moments you might catch in a posing routine that just make you stop and go, wow. And what could be packing more wow factor than Frank Zane's iconic vacuum pose? Now, it's true that many other people were doing this before him, but I would say that he was the first to truly master it. I don't recall anybody being able to hit a vacuum that pronounced with the arms overhead like that. Even Arnold acknowledged in his Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding that this is an extremely difficult feat to do. It has a really cool effect of making the lats and chest and ribcage all look enormous though, while minimizing the waistline at the same time. Zane also had excellent serratus development. That's those little fingers of muscle there just below the pecs. And I know there's at least one other man in Tony Pearson who might even do it a little better, but nobody is more synonymous with the vacuum pose than Frank Zane. He really nailed this one and made it his own, and for that reason, it's easily one of the most iconic poses of all time. Alright, moving on, we have Samir Bannout and the Christmas tree pose. Now, this one is hardly original. Almost every bodybuilder does it, and when they prepare to transition into the rear lat spread. But to my eyes, nobody has ever done it quite as well as the Lion of Lebanon. I mean, the definition here is off the charts, and his lower back literally looks like a tree. The triangle shape is perfectly symmetrical, the feathering in the lumbar region where it meets the lats looks like actual branches, and there even appears to be a small trunk there at the bottom to complete the effect. Here's another look in color, and yeah, Bannout owns this one. True, other guys like Dorian Yates, Arnold, Sean Ray, and Flex Wheeler all exhibited outstanding Christmas trees at one point or another, but like I said, nobody's was quite as picture perfect as Bannout's, so that's why he gets a shout out here. And speaking of Arnold, let's take a look at what I consider to be his most iconic pose. Like I said before, Arnold, perhaps more so than any other bodybuilder in history, had a whole slew of great poses in his arsenal. But this double straight arm one, I think, is his best. To this day, I don't see anybody that's been able to pull it off as well as he did. Now, I know that the Oak didn't invent this pose. Larry Scott, for one, was doing it before Arnold came along. But Schwarzenegger really put his stamp on it, though, like no other. His long arms with the full massive biceps and his thick striated chest really turn this into a work of art. Here's another look. It's just legendary stuff. Hall of Fame worthy material. I'm not even sure if this pose has an official name, so if it does, please let us know in the comments section. And from arms, we go to legs. Just as Arnold dominated with his huge and impressive guns, Platz lit it up with the best wheels of his day, probably of all time for that matter. So this is Tom Platz in the infamous moon pose. It was apparently banned. Perhaps the judges thought it offensive or just not becoming of a bodybuilder. I don't exactly know the reason or story behind that, so maybe one of you guys can enlighten me. But those hamstrings were just insane. The only other bodybuilder I've ever seen with that kind of detail through the hams was Ronnie Coleman, and perhaps Phil Heath now as well, based on what he showed us at this year's Mr. Olympia. But nonetheless, nobody had legs this big and defined and fully developed like Tom Platz. Those calves were also just ridiculous. I mean, look how low they insert. He was truly genetically gifted in the lower body, and so the moon pose was a clever way to show it off and definitely a unique move that he was famous for. Next we have Bob Parrish doing his signature kneeling pose. I love this one, it's just so aesthetic and classy. I'd like to see one of the classic physique guys try to pull it off today. Perhaps Chris Bumstead could do it. He fits the bill as a taller guy like Parrish with the tiny waist. Here it is in color, and talk about a V-taper, right? That's a creative way to show off your structural superiority and also look graceful while doing it. I know lots of bodybuilders throughout the 80s and 90s did kneeling poses like this one, but I feel Bob Paris pulled it off better than most, and this is one of his signatures, so that's why I decided to include it. Here's Shawn Ray in a similar shot. Now, Shawn is such an excellent poser. I could have chosen a bunch of different ones for him, but this kneeling pose right here I feel is perhaps his most iconic. It really highlights his amazing washboard abs, low lats, full wide pecs, and just overall balanced body. Here he is looking absolutely stellar at the 1999 Mr. Olympia. You can see that even as he got a little bit bigger over the years, he always maintained his lines, shape, and conditioning. He never sacrificed the integrity of his physique to play the mass game, and it's one of the things I respect most about him as a bodybuilder. I just feel like this is his pose. Nobody else does it quite as well. And if you want to talk iconic bodybuilding pictures, this is a top 10 material, no doubt. This is Francis Benfato, the French bodybuilder, looking like a Greek statue. In fact, I'd argue he looks better than a Greek statue. He's too muscular for that, but, still, it's nothing but pure quality. The shoulder-to-waist ratio is absolutely mind-blowing as well, and his lats and arms look huge. I just love this photo, man. And we got to feature Lee Labrada in a video like this. One of the greatest posers ever, and just like Arnold and Zane, he had several signature poses. But this one right here is my favorite, and arguably his most well-known. I don't even know what you call this, but the arms overhead looks just very awe-inspiring. Even the way he holds his fingers is very artistic. It's that little attention to detail that separates the masters from the mediocre. His legs are also big and defined, and he's just perfectly proportioned. So that's Lee Labrada and the arms overhead, just a classy pose all the way. Frank Zane did the same pose, but he also did something similar, and I prefer this variation from him with the fists balled up and held closer together like that. So obviously the vacuum is number one for him, but this pose is right up there as well as one of his most iconic. It's another very statuesque pose that looks like somebody sculpted it. Like, this was really back when bodybuilding was still an art form rather than just a freak show. That's what I love about all these old school poses, is that it's not just about power and size, but there's also an element of beauty and grace. One way to think of it is that these classic bodybuilders were more akin to majestic tigers and lions rather than the bulky, lumbering gorillas, rhinos, and hippos of today. And with this final version of the arms overhead pose, we take it way back to the 50s with Steve Reeves in perhaps the earliest example of an iconic bodybuilding pose. This mountaintop background I'm sure is fake, but still it's quite a sight to behold with the flaring lats and broad shoulders of the tall and athletic-looking Reeves. Here's another version, not quite as epic as the first, but still glorious. This man had one hell of a great structure and a very well-developed serratus and V-taper. Steve Reeves truly had a Herculean stature that was well ahead of its time. Now let's jump forward a few decades to the 90s when Flex Wheeler showed us why he earned his nickname in his signature splits maneuver. He looked so athletic while doing this, and yes, several other bodybuilders did the splits as well, but in my opinion, Flex was the most famous for it. Unfortunately, the quality of these old video screenshots isn't the best, but don't let that distract you from how amazing he looked. This was from the 1993 Arnold Classic where he brought his all-time best shape, and it shines through even in this grainy footage. I especially love the arms raised with the fingers pointed like that. It's a nice, elegant touch. To my eyes, this is the ideal bodybuilding physique right here. It doesn't get any better. One final look at the Sultan of Symmetry, showing off his trademark flexibility and superb back development. I believe this was from the year 1995, but don't recall which show it was, so please tell us in the comments if you happen to know. And here we have Flex Wheeler's contemporary, Kevin Levrone, in the back double biceps. Aside from his hands clasped, most muscular and side chest, this was Kevin's best pose. He really knocked this one out of the park with those round boulder delts and massive triceps and the wide, thick back. I also think he got the angle just right with this pose. I know Arnold was also famous for this one, but I think Levrone actually edges him out with his superior shoulders and just greater level of overall mass. Here's Larry Scott doing his signature pose. Again, don't know what to call this one, but it really accentuates his biceps and forearms, two of the most dominant body parts that he had. And here he is in a slightly modified version with the hand tilted up. Arnold tried his hand at this type of pose too, but Larry Scott did it first. Plus, as we've already seen, Arnold had a bunch of other notable poses, and I think Scott did this one equally well, so that's why he's included. Serge Nubret, what can I say? Now, I was debating whether to keep this in here or not because I'm not sure it was exactly a signature pose of his. and it's certainly not as recognizable as some of the other poses we've seen so far, but it's Serge Nubret, man. He's just so aesthetic, and he did hit this one on multiple different occasions, so yeah, he makes the list. What I love about this pose is that not only does it highlight the flexed arm, but it also shows off the lats from a rare angle while streamlining the waist and legs, making the upper body look especially impressive. Mike Mentzer in the crucifix pose. Again, lots of people did this one: Sergio Oliva, Samir Bannout, Paul Dillette, even Ronnie Coleman. But to my knowledge, nobody was quite as iconic in it as Mentzer. He just had the perfect structure for it with the small waist and wide shoulders, which look phenomenal in this position, by the way. I mean, look at the caps on those things. The slight vacuum here is a nice touch, which helps inflate the chest and lats, making him look even more Herculean than he already was. Plus, he had some crazy vascularity going on in those forearms. Just an epic shot from Mike Mentzer. Speaking of epic, it doesn't get much more epic than this. This was the famous quad stomp, courtesy of Jay Cutler, the 2009 Mr. Olympia edition, to be specific. And yes, this picture here looks to have been touched up a little, but nonetheless, those deep cuts and all that detailed feathering through his leg there isn't photoshopped. That's the real deal, guys. So here's a less filtered image, and yeah, those thighs were just on another level. Add in the huge upper body with the mountainous traps and shoulders, and then the massive calves to boot, and you have a Hall of Fame worthy pose, no doubt about it. Even back in 06, he was bringing the cuts. Look at that outer head. Good God, man. Have you ever seen so many striations on a single thigh before? The man's quads were truly legendary, and so was this pose. But before we get to the last and final pose I have to show you, here's something of an honorable mention for Tony Pearson. And it's only an honorable mention because I'm not sure it quite qualifies as a signature pose since I couldn't find many pics of him hitting it. He's a lesser known bodybuilder, but ladies and gentlemen, here we have the vacuum crucifix pose. Yes, Lee Haney did this too, but if you go and watch my other video on the greatest posing moves of all time, I have a short video clip of Pearson hitting this one while pulling off a massive Frank Zane quality vacuum. It's totally mind-blowing, so if you haven't seen it, click the link right now and be prepared to be amazed. But here we go now. This video wasn't presented in any order, but I did make sure to save the best for last. And who else but the myth Sergio Oliva? What other pose or picture do you know that can top this? This right here may very well be my favorite bodybuilding picture of all time. He just looks superhuman in a way that not even the mighty Arnold could quite achieve. The proportions are just ridiculous with his long but massive arms, big legs for his day, and the tiniest waist of any Mr. Olympia ever. Yes, Lee Priest did the victory pose too and looked exceptional, but nobody can top the original in my book. It might be because Sergio's arms were perhaps overlong for his body. It might be because his V-taper was second to none. I don't know, but this pose is just so impactful, so iconic, I can think of no better way to end this video. So there you have it, some of the most iconic, non-compulsory poses of all time. Hope you enjoyed, and if so, be sure to like and subscribe for more professional bodybuilding commentary like this. Also, if you think I missed anything, let me know in the comments below. Like I said, this list is by no means exhaustive. It's mostly just personal opinion, and I put this thing together kind of off the top of my head, so I wouldn't be surprised if there's a couple of doozies that just slipped my mind. But thanks for watching, guys, and until next time, I'm the Tominator signing off, and I'll be back.